How are you guys doing? Today is Tuesday, June 29th, 2021. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do a GOAT profile for Kawhi Leonard. The GOATed small forward for the Los Angeles Clippers turns 30 today, and with this episode of The Elite, I'm going to list out his accomplishments and his achievements, and just to go through what he's been able to accomplish from the moment he's hit the limelight, from the moment that the spotlight has been on him up until this very moment, to of course give context and understanding as to why he's not only regarded as one of the best players in the NBA and why he's not only an elite athlete when it comes to top level athletes playing in sports today. He is regarded as one of the greatest athletes to ever play within this game, a sport full of amazing athletes. So if you're unfamiliar with him, he's about 6'7", 225 pounds. He's incredibly stocky. He's just a very good, big, athletic, just like force. He's very controlled, I think is a nice way of putting it. And at the same time, he's also kind of a freak of nature. He has incredibly big hands, a very long wingspan, which helps him be one of the best defenders in all of basketball. He has great focus. Of course, he can stay in front of people because he has really deceptive quickness. And not to mention, he can use that deceptive quickness on the offensive end to really kind of score from anywhere. And he really kind of has a relentless nature to his game that has allowed him to achieve as much success as he had. So just going back, coming out of Los Angeles, he would establish himself as a good enough prospect to get a playing opportunity at San Diego State, which was pretty close by. And at San Diego State, he would go on to play his very first season in 2009-2010 under Steve Fisher. And in his freshman season, he would start 33 of the 34 games he would play in a season where San Diego State would go on to lose in the first round, but they would go on to make the tournament. In the 31 minutes he averaged 12.7, almost 13 points a game, while shooting 46% from the field, 20% from three, and 73% from the foul line. While averaging 13 points almost, he was averaging 9.9 rebounds, averaging 3.5 offensive rebounds per game in college at San Diego State. Not to mention he was averaging almost 2 assists, 1.5 steals as well. And in his first year, he would establish himself as a good young player. He would make the All-MWC, the All-Mountain West Conference in his very first year there. And this was after being California Mr. Basketball. So, of course, he was a very good basketball player coming into San Diego State. Following his very first year, he will come back for his sophomore year rather than go to the draft. And in his second year with San Diego State in 2010-2011, he would start all 36 games he would play in a season where San Diego State will go all the way to the Sweet 16. In that season, Kawhi Leonard would average probably 1 more minute per game, averaging 32.6. He would average 3 more points per game, averaging 15.5 points per game, while averaging 44% from the field, while averaging 2.5 more field goals per game. He would shoot 29% from 3, taking the same amount of shots, shooting 90% higher from 3. He would shoot 76% from the foul line, while averaging 10.6 rebounds, double-digit rebounds, while averaging 3 offensive rebounds for the second year in a row. He averaged 2.5 assists, 1.4 steals for the second year in a row. And after that stellar year, he would become first team All-Mountain West for his first 2 years. Of course, is a good feat. He would be named a consensus second team All-American, and after that year, he would establish himself as a good enough prospect to be taken with the 15th overall pick in the 2011 draft. And just to give a little bit of context, looking at players that were all-stars or picked ahead of him, Kyrie Irving was taken number 1 in that draft by the Cavs. Kemba Walker was taken 9th in the 2011 draft by the Bobcats, and Klay Thompson was taken 11th by the Warriors. In the first round, Nikola Vucevic was taken by the Philadelphia 76ers, and Jimmy Butler, the elite starting small forward for the Heat, was taken by the Bulls for the 30th pick. That was all in the first round. Kawhi was taken with the 15th pick in that round, or in that draft. And he would come into the NBA, and it would take some time for people to recognize how good he was, but he would come in as a force. In 2011, 2012, in his age 20 season, he would start 39 of the 64 games he would play on a very solid San Antonio Spurs team that was competing for titles. In a season where the San Antonio Spurs would finish with a 50-16 record. They finished with the best record in the Western Conference. And this is in the middle of a playoff run where the last time they didn't make the playoffs was 1997, just to give a sense, just in the middle of the Tim Duncan, Greg Popovich dynasty. This year, actually, Greg Popovich would go on to win Coach of the Year. So, of course, Greg Popovich... this would actually be the very first year in which Greg Popovich would win Coach of the Year, just for a little bit of context. And in that season, Kawhi Leonard would average 24 minutes, the least amount of minutes he'd average in a season other than the season in which he would be injured for San Antonio, but that's neither here nor there. In that season, he would average 8 points per game while shooting 49% from the field, 37% from three, and 77% from the foul line, while averaging 5 rebounds a game and assist, 1.3 steals as well. In 2012, he would make the all-rookie first team, and he wouldn't make many waves, but he would make himself a very important component, as he would make him, as by the end of the season, he would become a regular starter on the San Antonio Spurs team. And once they made the playoffs, they would end up sweeping the Jazz in the first round. They would end up sweeping the Los Angeles Clippers, the Lob City Clippers, in the second round, but they would end up losing in the conference finals. So the Thunder 4-2, right before the Thunder would end up losing to the Miami Heat the following year. Following that, Kawhi Leonard will come back to San Antonio for his second year in his age 21 season in 2012-2013. He would start 57 of the 58 games he would play, as he was a full-time starter from the beginning to the end of the year on a title contending San Antonio team in his second season. He did all this in a season where the Spurs would finish with a 58-24 record, with the second best record in the West, even though they played the full 84 game season compared to the previous year. They won 3 less wins than they had 2 years prior. But regardless, in this season, Kawhi Leonard would see his minutes per game increase from 24 minutes to 31 minutes per game. He would see his points per game increase from 8 points to 12 points per game as he continued to shoot 49% from the field, seeing his field goals as he would average 3 shots more per game. He would go on to shoot 37% from the field as he averaged a 3.5 attempt more per game. He would shoot 82% from the foul line, the first time you would ever shoot 80% from the foul line. He would average 6 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 1.7 steals as well. And once the San Antonio Spurs made the playoffs, because following that year, he wouldn't really get any accolades following that year. But once the Spurs made the playoffs, they would go right past the Lakers in the first round as they swept Kobe and them after the Lakers were really kind of going through their own sort of thing. They would end up beating the Warriors in 6 right before the Warriors became the Warriors. They would beat the Grizzlies in 4 they would sweep the Grizzlies in the conference finals, and then they would lose to the Miami Heat in 7 when the Miami Heat would go on to win their second straight title, when Ray Allen would sink the shot, when Danny Green would go on to set an NBA Finals record for NBA threes, or for 3-pointers in an NBA Finals series. Kawhi Leonard, of course, was a primary contributor for the San Antonio Spurs getting that far. Following his second season in San Antonio in 2013-14, his age 22 season, he would start 65 of the 66 games he would play in a season where the San Antonio Spurs would finish with the best record in the West with a 62-20 record with 4 more wins than the previous season. In this season, Kawhi Leonard would average 2 less minutes per game as he averaged 29 minutes per game. He would see his points increase just a little bit as he saw his points increase from 11.9 to 12.8, while still playing on a team with Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, other champion players that have won championships before. This season, while averaging 1 more point per game, he would do this while shooting 52% from the field. The first time he'd ever shoot over 50% from the field. He would shoot 38% from 3, and he would go on to shoot 80% from the foul line. He would average 6.2 rebounds. The second season in a row, he'd average 6 rebounds. He averaged 2 assists a game. He averaged 1.7 steals. The third season in a row, he averaged at least 1 steal a game. He'd do so every year in his career, but now in his first 3 years, I would say it's worth noting. And following the 2013-14 season, he would go on to be named to the NBA All Defensive Second Team. So of course, for the first time, he was recognized by the NBA for his defensive, or at least for his defensive prowess and for just being one of the league's best defenders. And following that regular season, the Spurs would end up beating the Mavericks in 7 in the first round, and this was a Mavericks team that won the finals 3 years prior, so this was still a very good, very viable Mavericks team. Not to mention that R.C. Buford won the Executive of the Year and Greg Popovich won Coach of the Year for the second time and since Kawhi's been there. In their conference semifinals, they would end up beating the Trailblazers with LaMarcus Aldridge and Damian Lillard. They would end up beating the Thunder in the conference final while Kevin Durant was still on the team. And they would end up beating the Miami Heat in the NBA Finals, as this would end up being Tim Duncan's 5th championship. But this would be Kawhi's first, of course, the first of his career. And in the NBA Finals, he would go on to have a very incredible finals. He would go on to be named the Finals MVP, and when he won the Finals, he would go on to average 17.8 points, 6.4 rebounds, but all while guarding the best player on the planet in LeBron James. And, of course, helping the San Antonio Spurs secure and end one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history. But, of course, Kawhi Leonard was not only a prime member of that, he was the MVP. He was an MVP, a valuable contribution to that team. So following his 4th season with San Antonio, or following his 3rd season with San Antonio, he would come back for year 4, his age 23 season in 2014-15. In that season, he would start all 64 of the games he would play in. The first season, he would start every game he played. In a season where the San Antonio Spurs would go on to finish with the 6th best record in the Western Conference. In this season, Kawhi Leonard would go on to average 31.8 minutes per game. Up until that point, the most minutes he'd average, around the same he'd average his second year. He would average 16.5 points per game. Up until that point, his career high. All while shooting 48% from the field, 35% from 3, and 80% from the foul line. The third season in a row, he shot 80% from the foul line. He would average 7 rebounds on the season. The first season he'd ever average 7. He averaged 2.5 assists. He would lead the NBA in steals with 2.3 steals alongside 0.8 blocks. In 2014-15, he would go on to be named to the All-Defensive First Team for the first time in his NBA career after being named the NBA steals leader for the only time in his career. He would be named the NBA Defensive Player of the Year, and this is, of course, after being a champion. And he wasn't even named an All-Star this year, but, of course, he was recognized as one of the best players in the entire NBA. And following this 2015 season, in which he would establish himself as one of the best players on one side of the ball, he would come back to the San Antonio Spurs for his fifth season in 2015-16, in his age 24 season, like I just said. In this season, he would start all 72 of the games he would play in a season where the San Antonio Spurs would finish with a 16-15 record. That was the second best record in the entire Western Conference. They won 12 more games than they had won the previous year, and R.C. Buford will win the Executive of the Year for the second time since Kawhi Leonard had been there. This year, Kawhi Leonard would actually be named an All-Star for the very first year in his career, as he averaged 33 minutes per game, the most minutes he'd ever average. He would see his points per game jump up from 16.5 to 21.2 as he shot 50% from the field, 44% from three, and 80% from the free throw line, as he was 2.5% away from being a 50-40-90 player on the season. This is the second time in his career he shot 50% from the field. This would be the first time in his career he shot 40% from three. This would be at this point the highest free throw percentage he'd ever shot. He would average 6.8 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 1.8 steals, and he would average a block per game, the first time he'd ever do that in his career. After being named an All-Star for the very first time in his career, he would go on to being named to the All-NBA first team, to the All-NBA first team for the very first time in his NBA career. The first time he was ever named to an All-NBA team, as he was recognized as a top 5 player in the NBA. He was named a All-Defensive First Team player for the second year in a row. He was named the Defensive Player of the Year for the second year in a row in 2015-2016. He has not won the award since, but considering he's won the award twice shows that it clearly wasn't a fluke when he won it. And of course, following a season in which he established himself as one of the best players in all of the NBA, the San Antonio Spurs would sweep the Memphis Grizzlies in the first round, and they would end up losing the conference semifinals to the Thunder, right before the Thunder would lose to the Warriors, and the Warriors would lose to the Cleveland Cavaliers after being up 3-1 over the Cavaliers. Following the 2015-16 season, Kawhi Leonard would come back for what would be his 6th season in San Antonio, his age 25 season in 2016-17. He would start all 74 of the games that he played. This is the most games that he's ever played in an NBA season in his career, his age 25 season. He did all this in a season where the San Antonio Spurs would go on to finish with the second best record in the West with a 61-21 record. They won 6 less games than the previous season, but of course Kawhi Leonard was continuing to do what he was doing best. He averaged 33 minutes, just as many as he did before, but he would see his points per game go up from 21 to 25 points per game. The first time that's the most he's ever averaged in his career. He would see his field goal percentage drop a little bit, or he would see a drop from 50.6 to about 48.5 as he took 2.5 more shots per game. He would shoot 38% from three as well, and he would go on to shoot 88% from the foul line. That would be the highest he'd ever shoot from the foul line in his career. He averaged 5.8 rebounds, which is the lowest he'd ever had since his rookie season. He would average 3.5 assists, which is the highest he'd ever put up in his career, alongside 1.8 steals. Finishing that season in 2016-17, of course, he was named to the All-Defensive First Team for the third year in a row. He has not been named to the All-Defensive First Team since 2017. He would go on to being named an All-Star for the second time in his career. He would be named to the All-NBA First Team for the second time in his career, and of course, the second year in a row. And following this season of superlatives, the Spurs would beat the Grizzlies in 6 in the first round in 2017. They would beat the Rockets in 6, and this is when the Rockets had James Harden. And then they would end up getting swept by the Warriors in the conference finals, as the Warriors would go on with Kevin Durant to sweep. They would go on to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers, and this was after Kawhi Leonard got hurt in the conference finals in Game 1. This actually did happen, but this but this would end Kawhi Leonard's 2017 campaign. And following that injury, he would sit out for most of the 2017-18 season. He would only play 9 games, which is why he wasn't an all-star in that year. He would average 23 minutes a game, averaging about 16 points while shooting 47% from the field, 31% from 3, and 82% from the free throw line. He would average 4.7 rebounds, 2.3 assists. He averaged 2 steals a game in those games he played, and he averaged a block. So, of course, that would be the second time, and the most recent time he averaged 2 steals per game, and that was the last time he averaged a block per game. But following the season in which he played 9 games in San Antonio, and not to mention this was a season in which San Antonio would go on to finish with the 7th best record in the West and lose in the first round to the Warriors. Kawhi Leonard would end up getting traded to the Toronto Raptors on the final year of his contract for DeMar DeRozan and Jakob Poeltl, and I'm pretty sure a draft pick. But following what would be his 7-year tenure in San Antonio, he would go to Toronto, and in his only season there, he would start all 60 of the games that he would play in a season in which the Toronto Raptors would finish with a 58-24 record. That was the second best record in the East. They finished with 1 less win than the previous season. This was the year that Pascal Siakam would win the most improved player, just for some context. In that year, he would go on to average 34 minutes a game, which is the most minutes he'd average in a season in his career up until that point. In those 34 minutes, he would average 26.6 points per game, which up until then was his career high, while shooting 49.6% from the field. He would go on to shoot 37% from 3 and 85% from the foul line. He would go on to average 7.3 rebounds, which up until then and for his entire career is the most rebounds he's ever averaged in a season. And he would go on to average 3.3 assists along with 1.8 steals. He would go on to be named an all-star for the 3rd time in the most recent 4-year span. He was named an all-star out of the East for the very first time. Not to mention that in 2019, he would be named to the All-NBA second team for the very first time in his career, not to mention being named to the All-NBA defensive second team for the very second time in his career as well. Following that season, he would lead the Toronto Raptors to the playoffs. In the first round, they would end up beating the 7th seed Orlando Magic in 7. They would end up beating the Philadelphia 76ers in 7 in the second round in the Eastern Conference semifinals off of a crazy last-second tie-breaking go-ahead shot from Kawhi Leonard to send them into the conference finals. They would end up beating the Milwaukee Bucks in 6 to send them to the NBA Finals, where they would face off against the Golden State Warriors. And many people may throw out the context that the Golden State Warriors were injured as a team. Klay Thompson was hurt. Kevin Durant got hurt. He barely played, and that is all true, but at the end of the day, the Toronto Raptors were the team that emerged victorious. And in 2019, Kawhi Leonard would go on to claim his second NBA title, and he would go on to claim his second NBA Finals MVP. In that series, he would go on to average 28.5 points, 9.8 rebounds, and 4.2 assists, while shooting 43% from the field, 36% from 3, and 91% from the line over those 6 games over the series. And coming out of that series, I think he would come out as the greatest Toronto Raptor player ever after just his 1 year. He was literally traded in and won the franchise a championship. And following his 2018-19 season, he would choose to sign with his hometown Los Angeles Clippers. And in 2019, that was the contract he signed. He signed a 3-year, $103 million contract. But looking at the first year of his 3-year deal, in 2019-2020, a season that was, of course, impacted by COVID in the sense that it delayed the end of the season, but then they were able to play the rest of it and the playoffs in the bubble. He would go on to start all 57 of the games he would play for the Los Angeles Clippers in a season where they would finish with a 49-23 record. They finished with the second best record in the entire Western Conference in his very first season, teaming up with Paul George. In this season, Kawhi Leonard would go on to average 32 minutes a game. He would go on to be named an All-Star for the very fourth time in that 5-year span. Of course, that year he missed was the year in which he was injured following the injury in the Warriors series. But in those 57 games, he would go on to average 27.1 points, which to this day is the most points per game that Kawhi Leonard has ever had in a season in his career. He did all that while shooting 47% from the field, 38% from three, and he went on to shoot 88.6% from the foul line, which up until this point is the highest free throw percentage that he's ever shot in a season in his career. He did all this while averaging 7.1 rebounds. This would be the third season in his career he averaged 7 rebounds in the league. He averaged 4.9 assists, which up until this point is the most assists that Kawhi Leonard has ever, which up until that point was the most assists that Kawhi Leonard had ever put up in a season in his career. And he would average 1.8 steals as well. And following the 2019-2020 season, Kawhi Leonard would be, of course, named the All-Star Game MVP that year as well. He would be named to the NBA All-Defensive Second Team for the third time in his NBA career. He would be named to the NBA All-NBA Second Team for the second time in his NBA career. Not to mention being named an All-Star for the fourth time, like I just said. And once the Clippers would go on to make the playoffs, they would go on to beat the Mavericks in the first round in 6, and they would go on to lose to the Nuggets in the conference semifinals as the Clippers held the Nuggets up 3-1, but the Nuggets were able to come back from being down 3-1 to advance to the Western Conference Finals to eventually lose to the Lakers, who eventually won the entire thing. Following the 2019-2020 season, this leads us to Kawhi Leonard's most recent season, his age 29 season is set with the Los Angeles Clippers, his second year of 3 of his contract. And in this most recent season, he would start all 52 of the games that he would play in a season where the Los Angeles Clippers finished with a 47-25 record. They finished with the second best record they finished with the fourth best record in the Western Conference, as they finished with 2 less wins in the previous season. As with shortened seasons, they finished a little worse this year than they did last year. But regardless, in these games that Kawhi Leonard played this season, he would average 34.1 minutes per game. By 0.1 minute, that's the most minutes he's ever averaged in a season this year. He would go on to average 24.8 points per game. This would be the 5th season in his NBA career, 5th in the last 6 seasons in which he averaged 20 points per game in a season. He did all this while shooting 51.2% from the field. That is the highest percentage he's ever shot in a season in which he scored at least 20 points per game. He would go on to shoot 39.8% from 3, and he would shoot 88.5% from the foul line. He was 0.2% away, or he was 0.2% away from, and 1.5% and from free throw away from being a 50-40-90 player this year. He would go on to average 6.5 rebounds this year. This would go on to be the 7th season in his career in which he's averaged at least 6 rebounds in a season. He would go on to average 5.2 assists, which is the most assists he's ever averaged. That's the first time he's ever averaged at least 5 assists in a season. He would average 1.6 assists, or 1.6 steals as well. This season, he would go on to be named an All-Star for the 5th time in the last 6 seasons, the 5th time in his 10-year career. career. Not to mention that he will go on to being mentioned to the NBA All-Defensive Second Team for the fourth time in his career, and he will go on to being named to the All-NBA First Team for the third time in his career. As he led the Los Angeles Clippers this season to the fourth best record in the Western Conference, and once they made the playoffs, they would end up facing off against the Mavericks in the first round for the second year in a row. This year, they would end up beating the Mavericks in 7, and then they would end up beating the Jazz in 6 in the conference finals. They beat the Jazz in 6 in the conference finals, but Kawhi Leonard went out due to a knee injury in Game 4, and the Clippers have really been willing on without him. Looking at what the Clippers are up to right now, the Clippers are most recently coming off of a Game 5 win versus the second seed Phoenix Suns to keep their playoff hopes alive. But as of right now, Kawhi Leonard, it's very obvious that Kawhi Leonard, alongside their other teammates, was a very integral reason why the Clippers were one of the best teams in basketball this season, why they were able to get past the first round. And with that said, that leads us to where we are as Kawhi Leonard now enters his 30s. And I do think he's already established himself as one of the greatest basketball players of all time for leading the teams that he's been able to lead to just amazing championship feats. And I just think I don't think he's close to being done. With that said, I want to thank Wikipedia. I want to thank Basketball Reference. I want to thank ESPN, the NBA websites for all the facts and figures necessary for me to complete this episode. And of course, I want to thank everyone for listening to all 31 minutes of this piece. Once again, today is Tuesday, June 29th, 2021. I want to wish Kawhi Leonard a happy 30th birthday. If you ever get a chance to watch him, he wears number 2 with the Los Angeles Clippers for this upcoming season. He may change his team between now and the next episode, but until then, if you get a chance to watch him, watch him. Thanks once again for listening to this piece, and once I have my next episode, it'll be up and ready. Thanks for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and don't forget to be elite. Peace out, and I'll catch you tomorrow.